Well, good morning and welcome. I want to thank you all for joining us and welcome you to our third webinar. This is part of our 2020-2021 Virtual Discovery Farms Conference. Reminder, the theme for our event this year is keeping up with your conservation goals through change and challenge. And we've got what we think is a very interesting set of related but diverse topics that we're going to explore over the next few weeks here. This program is brought to you by the Discovery Farms programs in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And you're seeing the logos of a lot of the sponsor groups that support the efforts of the Discovery Farms programs in both states. So I want to thank them for their support. They're what allows us to do these sorts of events and activities. Just a word about Discovery Farms. Discovery Farms is a water quality research and education program that focuses on that intersection of agriculture and water quality and stresses the importance of farmer leadership. We've had programs active in both states, and there are also several other states that have Discovery Farms programs as well. So you might ask yourself, why webinars? A little bit of history. The Wisconsin Discovery Farms program has hosted an annual conference each December for a number of years, and they've been very well attended and really a way to get their information out across Wisconsin. Last year in Minnesota, we hosted a Discovery Farms Summit that included the programs from both states. And it was very well attended, and we had a lot of great feedback and discussion. And so shortly after that, we started talking about doing something again this year, this winter season. Obviously, the pandemic has changed all of those plans. And so early on, as we had begun planning for what we would do this winter, we had to change, obviously, just like many of your groups have had to make adjustments as well. And so we decided to move away from doing a one-day event and recognizing how difficult it is to be in front of your computer for extended length of time. We chose to do this series of 7 events, 3 in December and 4 in January on Wednesdays over the noon hour. And so we're glad that you've taken the time to join us. And also would note it's very nice to see that we've had a lot of people who've been with us for all 3 webinars so far. This will be our last webinar in December. Then we're going to be off for the holidays, and we'll be back on January 6th and have the 4 Wednesdays in January will be our concluding sessions. There are CEU credits available for certified crop advisors. And so near the end, we will put up the sign-in sheet with the QR code. And if you have that app, you can just hold it up to your screen and register for this session through that app. If you have difficulty doing that or don't have the app, just put your name and your CCA number in the chat box, and we'll make sure to get those credits turned in for you. A little bit about how today will work. If you haven't already, we'd ask all of the participants, the viewers, to mute your mics and your cameras. So only when someone is speaking or presenting, we'd of course ask them to have their equipment on. But otherwise, if we all mute our cameras and mics, it helps with bandwidth, and hopefully we can have a smooth presentation. When you have a question, and we encourage you to submit questions, please type them into the chat box. The presentation is being recorded and will be on Facebook Live and on YouTube. So it's really essential that we don't have folks talking over one another and confusion about videos. So we really strongly suggest that you use the chat box. With that, we want to get into our program for today. We're talking today about some of the latest resources on soil health. And our first speaker is Kristen Brennan. Kristen is a Wisconsin native, now working in Minnesota. In fact, for the last 5 years, Kristen has served as the Assistant State Soil Scientist and Soil Health Specialist for our Minnesota NRCS. And so I want to thank Kristen for joining us and sharing information with us today. And at this time, I'll turn things over to her. Kristen.
Thanks so much, Warren. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for that introduction here. I'll get my presentation up and running. Erica, you have to let me know if it looks good on your end. Okay, everything looking kosher out there?
Looks good, Kristen.
Awesome, thanks guys. Well, good afternoon. Like Warren said, my name is Kristen Brennan, and I'm the Assistant State Soil Scientist and Soil Specialist with Minnesota NRCS. And I'm speaking today on behalf of our state conservationist, Troy Daniel. So Mr. Daniel wishes so much he could be here and sends his apologies, but he had to attend a meeting with the chief. So he asked if I'd be able to share his message with you today. So as Warren also said, one of our goals today is to share some of the best ways that farmers can measure and learn about soil health on their farms. I'll give a few updates too from Minnesota NRCS, and then share some of the resources that are available with you. So to start off, for those of you that might be new to soil health or possibly looking to continue to build on some of the practices you might currently be doing on your own farms, NRCS offers some really excellent programs to help offset some of the costs that are associated with adopting some of our soil health practices. So the core soil health practices that we offer through EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and also CSP, which is our Conservation Stewardship Program, include practices like conservation crop rotation, no-till and reduced-till, and cover crops. And in 2020 alone, Minnesota NRCS applied over 2.4 million acres of these core practices across Minnesota. So these acres don't include producers who are only seeking technical assistance or who choose other types of incentive programs, but it is clear that Minnesota producers are seeking benefits such as lower input costs, higher net profit, and more resilient farms. So one of the critical challenges surrounding soil health systems is really collecting sound baseline and temporal data to gain a better understanding of soil function. And it also helps us to track the effectiveness of our practices. So this word cloud represents responses to a survey that we gave to 25 producers across the state who are part of a 5-year statewide soil health initiative where they use cover crops on the same acres every year. So the goal with this effort was really to try to just help them get their feet wet with soil health. So we asked them what changes they observed in those soils over that 5-year period. So the larger the word here, the more often it showed up in our survey responses. So while many of these comments and observations were anecdotal, what is it that you see? What do you notice? What words are largest? We see things like better structure, water infiltration, worms was a real popular one. We even see like appearance and smell. But of course, the biggest one right in the middle is just better. They just noticed that their soils were better. So what is it that makes it better? What kind of data should we collect to best communicate the changes that our farmers are seeing in order to really help them make more meaningful management decisions? So NRCS field staff and soil scientists have been collecting data to assess soil change on several study sites and demonstration plots across the state. So not only does this data help us to define how these soils are better under our soil health management systems, but they also help us to update our technical standards and improve our technical assistance for producers. So traditionally, we've tended to focus on something called inherent soil properties. So these are the things that I like to think of that our soils are born with, things like mineralogy or soil texture. But changes to inherent properties happen very slowly, if at all, and they happen over a geologic time frame, really. But what about man's influence on soil? So we call these dynamic properties. So these are soil properties that we can change within our own lifetime, either positively or negatively by management. So these are things like organic matter or water holding capacity, bulk density, or nutrient cycling efficiency. So I really like to think of dynamic properties as the potential that our soils hold. So I think this picture really tells it well. This is a field from one of those study sites. And this field shows the same soils on the same landscape position. The only difference is how they're managed. So on the left, we have a more conventional system with no covers, and on the right, we have minimum tillage and a diverse cover crop. But so the changes are not only obvious above ground, but below ground too. So on the left here, you can see that that soil is lighter in color. It's got a tighter sort of soil structure. We're not really seeing many obvious signs of life. Whereas the soil sample taken from the right-hand side, it's darker, so we know that we've got more carbon, more organic matter stored in that soil. We can see that it's got that cottage cheese granular type structure that we like to see, and really more obvious signs of life. So it's these dynamic properties that we're really focusing on when we're assessing soil health. So in addition to the demo plots and the field studies that NRCS is doing, we're also trying to capture on-site dynamic properties using an in-field soil health assessment. And this is part of our conservation planning process with our interested producers. So this tool really helps us assess things like residue cover and breakdown, again, that soil structure and color, plant roots, biological diversity. And a lot of these represent simple observational assessments that anyone can do with minimal equipment or materials that they readily have on hand. And these are really easy ways that farmers can measure and learn about soil health on their own farm fields. And not only that, it also helps us communicate the benefits of soil health to our producers. So if this is something you're interested in running on your own farm, please be sure to reach out to your local NRCS office for assistance. So in addition to data collection and assessing soil change over time, some of the key goals that NRCS is focusing on with our soil health strategy is really increasing the number and the diversity of partners that we have. Our focus is we're kind of looking more at urban agriculture and local food going into next year, food sovereignty, issues with food deserts across the state. We have a continued focus on training our NRCS and partner staff in soil health and how to best incorporate that into our conservation planning process. We'd like to offer more producer scholarships for field days and other education and outreach activities, as well as financial support to support our local field offices to build more of these demo projects that really help highlight the benefits of conservation in action. And not only that, but improving soil health messaging through our producer success stories, podcast, radio, video content, social media, all of these things. Because the more that we talk about soil health, the more that we highlight the successes of our local producers, the more it becomes part of our day-to-day conversations. So really key to successful soil health strategy, again, lies in our partnerships. So a new project that Troy wanted to highlight today is the Ecosystem Services Market Partnership with the Nature Conservancy. So this is really a first of its kind sort of pilot project in Minnesota. And it's focusing on providing financial incentives to encourage more farmers to implement practices that help improve soil health, help store carbon in our soils, and reduce nutrient runoff from farmland. So the target of this project is to enroll 50,000 corn and soybean acres over the next 3 years, really focusing on the Sauk River watershed in Minnesota. And the program hopes to test and streamline the creation and sale of environmental credits from farmland, as well as quantifying the ecosystem service benefits of improved nutrient management and soil health. Really, the goal is to develop long-term financial incentives for sustainably managed farmland. So that's pretty exciting. But here you can see just the sheer number and diversity of partners that are involved in this project. We've got Minnesota NRCS and the Nature Conservancy, Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program, Stearns SWCD, Field to Market, Land O'Lakes, Minnesota Milk, Bowser MPCA, and the University of Minnesota Forever Green, just to name a few. So through best management practices and targeted conservation projects, we can lower farm costs, produce more food, and conserve healthy lands and waters into the next generation. Another core partnership that NRCS is focusing on is with the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition. So this is Minnesota's only producer-led and producer-driven soil health organization. So their goal is improving soil health by reducing inputs and increasing profits through support, education, and networking, and most importantly, through mentorship. So the core goal of the coalition is farmers teaching farmers about their experiences with soil health, both in practice and in business. And this mentorship, this one farm to another, farmers teaching farmers, is so key to overcoming barriers to successful soil health adoption. So they're doing this through providing quality educational programming with their annual soil health school. They did a whole series of virtual field days and farm tours this summer. And you can find them a lot at our local conferences and workshops too, with presentations. They are also working to collect more on-farm data to really help us assess Minnesota-specific soil health systems, both for the agronomic and the economic benefits and impacts. So they're a great organization to work with. Another one of the main topics for today is resources. There are so many resources out there to help inform and educate us, and this is just a very short list of some of my favorites. If you visit the Minnesota NRCS homepage, You'll find information on our programs and our practices and how you can contact your local field office if you're interested in applying. Also, make sure you check out our NRCS YouTube channel. So we've worked really hard over the last year to build a video library featuring the diversity of our local producers and their journey with conservation and soil health. So there's some really fantastic stories that you can view there at our YouTube channel. If you visit the National NRCS Soil Health webpage, you'll find our Unlock the Secrets of Soil National campaign. They have fantastic educational guides. There's video tutorials on a lot of the soil health assessments that we talked about today. And there's tons of other resources, not only for our technical staff, but for the producers that we work with as well. So here's the link again to the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition. If you view their website, you'll find upcoming events, membership information. You can also check out their YouTube channel where they've archived all of the virtual field days and farm tours from this summer, as well as fantastic interviews with their mentor farmers. Then we've got the Minnesota Office for Soil Health, or MOSH. So this is a collaboration between the Board of Water and Soil Resources and the University of Minnesota's Water Resource Center. Dr. Anna Cates is their soil health specialist. She's fantastic. So MOSH works towards healthy farms and ecosystems by delivering soil education, promoting grower networks, and researching best practices. So again, another fantastic local resource. And then finally, we have the Soil Health Nexus. So this is a university-led team. I believe their home base is in Wisconsin, but they represent universities from across the North Central region. And they're really dedicated to increasing access to research-based soil health knowledge, extension, and resources. Their website is so wonderful, and it's full of fantastic information, demo videos. They have Soil Health Toolbox, and they've also been hosting monthly digital cafe webinar series, which have really been fantastic. So those are also all recorded and archived, and you can find that on their webpage as well. So there's some fantastic resources for you to start with. So NRCS was born of the Dust Bowl. We were originally called the Soil Erosion Service. And here you can see pictures on the left from the 30s and 40s, and then pictures on the right that are more current. So even though there's over 80 years difference between these pictures, gosh, they don't look that different, do they? So in Minnesota today, we still have over 5 tons an acre of soil loss per acre per year, just through wind erosion alone, and another 2 tons of soil per acre per year lost through sheet and rill erosion. So protecting our precious soil resource from loss through wind and water erosion is still a challenge, and it is still a major resource concern facing many of our farmers today. But we're addressing these challenges together, and this is where NRCS's mission overlaps with Discovery Farms Minnesota. So NRCS is a supporter and a partner with Discovery Farms because we really appreciate the on-farm, real-world, farmer-led studies and monitoring that Discovery Farms does, because it really helps us to understand the impacts of conservation practices, both for soil health and for the producer's bottom line. And we all know that farmer-to-farmer technology transfer is so critically important, that farmers learning and sharing information together is really the key to moving the needle for conservation and profitability. But we also know that nothing worth doing is ever easy, right? So NRCS and our partners stand ready to assist producers with the voluntary adoption of practices that really best fit their operation and help them become more resilient and profitable for generations to come. So the future of agriculture in America really depends on the health and the longevity of our soils. So thanks everybody so much. Please let me know if you have any questions. And remember, I didn't hear your question, but the answer is always soil health.
Thank you, Kristen. That's a great slide to end with. Hopefully, we haven't had any questions come in the chat box yet. I'm thinking that perhaps, given the nature of your talk and the next talk, we may get questions at the end that both of you can answer. So hopefully you'll be able to stay with us. I just want to thank you again for joining us today, and thank you and State Conservationist Troy Daniel for your support and partnership with us as well. So with that, we're going to move on to our next presenter. Dr. Christine Morgan is the Chief Scientific Officer for the Soil Health Institute. Dr. Morgan was named a 2020 Soil Science Society of America Fellow, an annual award presented for outstanding contributions to soil science through education, service, and research. So we're very glad to have Dr. Morgan join us today from North Carolina. So I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Warren. And thank you, Kristen. I really enjoyed your presentation, and it was so lovely to see those nice prairie soils again. I studied in Wisconsin at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for 5 years and learned a lot about soil and fell in love with those gorgeous silt loams and prairie soils. So I'm happy to be here with you all today and talk a little bit about the soil, assessing soil health and the approach that we're taking at the Soil Health Institute, and to show you some information that we're learning and some examples, and also to present some fun practical measures that you can do to assess your soil health at home. But before I get started, I do want to show some appreciation for the many scientists that have contributed to some of the graphs and data analyses that I will show you today. We have soil scientists at the Soil Health Institute, Drs. Capilazzi, Lipson, Cope, Ricci, Groove, Bean, Tracy, Bagnall, and Almquist, that have all contributed to some of the work that you'll see today. And I love that bumper sticker, Kristen. Where can I get one of those? I didn't hear your question, but the answer is soil health. And I just thought, honestly, Kristen did a great job. I feel like I'm repeating a little bit, so I'm gonna go a little faster and maybe we can have more discussion. But, Kristen talked about, soil health, first of all. And when people ask me about it, sometimes I get the question, what is soil health? Do we know what soil health is? And, the way I think about soil health is just the ability of soil to function. And in agriculture, it's the function to, to create that biomass that is, sold as a commodity or as food or whatever. And the healthier our soil is, the less input we have to do to get that production of biomass. And Kristen already talked about those inherent properties of soil versus how anthropogenic change affects our management in agriculture, affects soil and its function. And I like to put up this picture. Shows my Texas roots, because though I'm in North Carolina and I was trained in Wisconsin, I am a native Texan. And on the left-hand side, we have this nice East Texas soil. And in the middle, we have a soil that I think is taken in Idaho, and it's from the College of Ag in Idaho, but it also looks like a soil in Central Texas. So it's a shallow soil with a little limestone under it. And really what you're looking at are two very different soils. They have different inherent properties with the mineralogy and the clay that they have. And they're definitely in different climates. And one formed under a forest and one formed under prairie. But that doesn't mean that both of these soils have, they can both be healthy, right? It's just going to be different healthy. And then this is my equivalent of Kristen's picture with the cover crop and the tillage, where she showed the gorgeous differences in soil structure. Again, this is the same soil. And in this soil is just managed differently. So here on the left, I show you two soils that have a potential to be healthy. And then on the right, I have a soil that is the same soil with different health. And essentially what's happening is, because of the way the soil on the left is managed differently from the soil on the right, though the same crop is being grown, that's cycling water very differently. In the background on the right, you can see some erosion. You can see here that this nice silty soil is crusting, and it's kind of got that shimmer on it. It's wet at the top, it's not draining well. And I think we've all experienced these differences before, but that's what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about soil health. And at the Soil Health Institute, we are looking at defining, looking at a lot of data, and I'll talk to you about that data set first of all, after I talk about why we want to measure soil health and what are some of our goals when we're talking about health. And one of the goals is asking just the question, is the management that's being employed on a field moving the soil toward, a healthier state? And that's just measuring soil health as an indicator of progress. And the way we can think about it is this is a scale. And on one side are soil health assessment measurements with a conventional, or what I call here as business as usual, kind of agriculture, which is probably some sort of conservation tillage program. And on the right-hand side, we could have the measures of a soil that we think is just following all those fundamental principles that NRCS puts forward about, how to manage soil for health, keep it covered, live roots, biodiversity, minimize disturbance. And then in the middle might be those measurements that we have of the soil health system. And the idea is that we can track the movement of that soil health system towards a target soil health system. And the next question is, very specifically, is the soil performing each job to the best of its ability? And that gets back to that, management versus inherent properties question. And what we try to think about, I'm a soil physicist, so I'm always thinking about water. And of course, I know agriculturalists are very commonly thinking about carbon. To me, they're one and the same because you increase your soil carbon and minimize disturbance, you get soil structure, and then you're cycling carbon, you're cycling nutrients, you're cycling water. And also we're making our soils resistive to erosion, improving its ability to infiltrate water. And then there's even the talk about an ability for the soil management to help suppress diseases and pests. So we can talk about, general movement of the soil towards a more healthy system. And then we can think about individual functions that we may or may not be interested in. I'm from Texas, and we've done a lot of work with interviewing farmers there. And, farmers say they're interested in two things. They're interested in water and water. So that's probably a little bit different when you have a higher rainfall and lower evaporative demand. But, so I would imagine that depending on where you are in Wisconsin or Minnesota, or depending on where you are in the US or the world, that you might reprioritize some of these functional outcomes. And so with that, we think about how do we measure these soil and what are these functions we're interested in? And just like Kristen, I put a backdrop in here, this brown circle, which indicates climate and texture. Texture is just another placeholder for some soil inherent properties. I just chose texture because in our situation, that gives us a lot of information. And then of course, climate, how hot, cold, wet, or dry you are. And then, I put some functions up here, like carbon storage, carbon cycling. We know this, we cycle more carbon, we cycle nutrients, and we can also store more water. And then, there's the whole water flow erosion component of our soil functioning. And the big question is how do we measure these things? And at the Soil Health Institute, we just have this project where we looked at 124 sites across North America. And at each of these sites, there was a control, such as a business as usual or the conventional cropping system in that area. And then there were treatments of soil health management systems, practices. And some of these practices, the most common practice was reduced tillage. There was also adding cover crops, residue management, or increasing the amount of residue left in the field, and then also applying organic amendments such as manure or compost. And the goal of this project was to identify the most effective indicators of soil health and evaluate soil health indicators on long-term, using these long-term research sites. And we looked at over 30 measurements that indicate soil health. And I just want to say, I've been at the Soil Health Institute for about 2 years. And before that, I was at Texas A&M University. And the whole focus of my project, of all of my work at A&M, was how do we get soil information rapidly and inexpensively? And so kind of what I added to this project was, some technologies that were kind of early on, such as I'll show you an iPhone app or a smartphone app that we've demonstrated with this project. And I'm just all about how do we get information without taking soils to the lab? And so I'll just give you some examples of that too. But first of all, here are some of the measurements that we evaluated, and I've listed them associated with some different processes we might be interested in, such as carbon storage and cycling, nitrogen cycling, soil structure, water movement, and then the community represents the microbes because we know microbes do most of the work in the soil. They make the structure, they cycle the carbon and the nitrogen, and they alter the soil so it changes how water flows. And so we did a couple of different measurements here too. And I will just mention that some of these measurements are quite common, such as soil carbon. Some measurements are not so common. They're kind of early in the research world, which would be the shotgun functional metagenomics. And then some of these you'll recognize, like that are in the Haney test or in the CASH, the Cornell Assessment of Soil Health Index test, or SMAF. And that's kind of where these were chosen. And they were also chosen for me, like I've added aggregate stability using the Slake smartphone app, because I thought, man, if we could measure aggregate stability with our phones, that would really bring soil health measurement very accessible to people. So I could just quit my talk right here, because my take-home message is you keep your measurements simple and meaningful. You know, as a farmer, as a soil manager, I think that's the most important thing. You know, take measurements that mean something to you, and it help you understand how your management is affecting your soil. But I will keep going. So when we think about, you know, back to this, you know, in the context we have soil inherent properties and climate, and in the forefront we have these functions, and the interplay between these inherent properties and these functions is management. And that's always the big question, right? Is how is my management affecting my soil health? And the way you answer that question is you measure it. So I'm just going to give a couple of examples. So, you know, how do we measure carbon storage and carbon cycling? And you saw the list, right? Earlier, I didn't read them all out very purposely because I don't want to overwhelm anyone with a lot of words. But we looked at these 124 sites across the U.S. and we asked ourselves, how did these different management or measurements associated with carbon cycling and storage react to management? And so these are just a couple of log response ratio plots, and I'll explain how to read them. On the y-axis are the managements that we had. So we had rotational diversity, like rotating your crop count, number of crops in a rotation, residue retention, which is just, you know, residue retention, increasing residue retention, adding organic amendments as compared to inorganic amendments, having cover crops in the rotation, and decreasing the tillage. And decreasing the tillage, the comparison was it could be, you know, moldboard or chisel plow or reduced till compared to no till, as long as there was a reduction in tillage. So it even could be chisel till to a reduced tillage of some sort, or chiseling once a year versus chiseling every 3 years, something like that. So it's just reduced tillage in general. It's not, there is a lot of no-till in there, but it's not all no-till. On the x-axis are the different measurements. So in this example, we have soil organic carbon, active carbon, which some of you may be more familiar with being called POX, POXC, or potentially oxidizable carbon, permanganate oxidizable carbon, my bad. And then the two different respirations, a 24-hour respiration and a 96-hour respiration. These respiration measurements, the 96 is in the Cornell test, and the 24-hour respiration, I think, is in the Haney test. And essentially the way you read these, if you look at the 0 line that I put in here, if any of these dots or whiskers touch the 0 line, that means that this particular management strategy did not change, statistically, did not change this measurement. And so, for instance, let's go through this one, soil organic carbon. So interestingly, increasing the rotation diversity actually decreased organic carbon. I suspect it was a function of disturbance. Crop count did not have an effect on soil organic carbon. Residue retention increased soil organic carbon. It was just barely statistically significant of an increase. Organic amendments very significantly increased, so increased soil organic carbon by roughly 25%. And so did cover crops, and decreasing tillage increased organic carbon individually by about 10%. And the same with, we had the same response to active carbon, other than you can see the residue retention had a greater increase in active carbon, and it was much more statistically significant. And, you know, they're ranging now between 10 and 20%. And the same with 24-hour respiration, it also increased with these managements, similarly to soil organic carbon. But you can see 96-hour respiration was not as sensitive to residue retention and decreased tillage, which was a surprise to us, but there you go. The interesting thing is of these 124 sites, there were a total of over 2,000 soil samples collected. And I failed to mention that we collected them all at the same time of the year. So it was in the spring prior to management like tillage or planting. And so there were a couple that we couldn't get out there until after they had done some spring tillage, and those were removed from the decreased tillage treatment. So that just kind of gives you an idea of soil garbage. And I think the take homes of this is, keep it simple. These are all kind of reflecting changes in carbon. And they, as a general rule, all give us the same type of information. When we think about water storage, the really cool thing about this project is that we were able to really capture the effect of increasing soil organic carbon due to management changes on soil capacity soil water. Originally, we had these kind of graphs associated with the NRCS database. But the problem with the NRCS database is a lot of that data was collected for mapping soils. And so for a given soil, changes in carbon were associated with changes along the soil catena, like a hill slope versus a toe slope. But in this particular analysis, we actually now have the same soil, and the changes in soil organic carbon are only due to management because they're small plot research and long-term research projects. So it gave us a much more responsive data set to look at how increasing soil organic carbon as a function of management increases plant available water. So here on the y-axis, we have plant available water, and on the x-axis, there's just silt content. But I want you to know that what goes into this model is sand, is the whole texture, so sand and silt and clay. And what we're showing here is the yellow line is 1% soil organic carbon, and the purple line is 4% soil organic carbon. And so essentially, if we can increase our soil organic carbon by 3%, we can store an additional ½ an inch of water per 5 inches of soil. And I tried to delete this last minute, but I couldn't because this is the way the graphs are put up. Non-calcareous soils are primarily the surface soils in Wisconsin and Minnesota, but we also had calcareous soils, and we found that calcareous soils responded very differently than non-calcareous. I assume that it's because the calcium carbonate fraction is in the silt and sand size fraction. So that's a longer story. I think the interesting part for today is the story on the left-hand side, that soil organic carbon can increase plant available water. And so with these kinds of functions, we don't need to measure plant available water. It's nice to measure it, and I think it's a great measurement being a soil physicist, but soil organic carbon and texture are probably good enough to get an idea of how your carbon is increasing. Also, when we think about nitrogen cycling, one of the measurements that we made is called potentially mineralizable nitrogen. This is a soil sample that's taken to the lab, and it's like a 7-day anaerobic incubation. So it is not like measuring mineralizable nitrogen in your field, but it's a pretty good proxy for nitrogen cycling because there is a good relationship between this PMN measurement that we made to aerobic incubations that are made of nitrogen mineralization made in the field. And what we found, we did a lot of regression analysis to see, hey, what's most related to potentially mineralizable nitrogen in the field? And we found that in both row crop and perennial sites that we needed to know texture, so that's that background inherent information. We needed to know soil organic carbon, and then we needed to know that 24-hour respiration number. And if we knew those, we could do a pretty good job of estimating what our mineralized PMN value is going to be. And so that's another example of keeping it simple. If we replaced soil organic carbon in this prediction with total nitrogen, our R-squared did improve, so our prediction accuracy did improve. But again, this is just kind of an example of keeping it simple. So also, I think the main reason why I was asked to speak today is to talk about erosion resistance. And so aggregate stability is the main measurement when we're looking at wind and water erosion resistance of soil. And so this is a beautiful picture of aggregate. And this is an example on a sandy soil, a conventional till versus no tillage. These were some cores that were pulled in our project. And you can see that aggregate stability, even in sand, shows up visually. It is sensitive to management. And this is an example from NRCS of the effect of organic matter and reduced disturbance on the slaking of a soil aggregate in water. So we have a lot of ways to measure aggregate stability. There's the Cornell rainfall simulator that's at the cache in the cache measurement. Wet sieve procedure, which is like the old school soil science way of doing aggregate stability. It's standardized by ag engineering methodology. There's the Slakes, which is the iPhone or the smartphone app. I always interchange iPhone and smartphone. It's a smartphone app. And the Soil Stability Index, which is another very interesting measure that's been used in soil science. It's less standard, but it's still pretty good. And now I'm just going to show you some pictures just to give you an idea of what's involved in these measurements. So the Cornell rainfall simulator, you get a soil sample, you put it in a sieve, you rain on it, and then whatever the unstable aggregates fall through the sieve, and you look and see what stayed out of the sieve and what stayed stable, and you get a % water stable aggregate measurement. So pretty straightforward, but it requires a sieve and a Cornell rainfall simulator. This wet sieve procedure that I said was kind of the old school standard method in soil science. You sift your soil to get these aggregates at 0.25 to 2 millimeters of diameter. You put the sieve in water and you oscillate it in water, and then you oscillate in a dispersing solution. And essentially you're looking at the aggregates that come out of the sieve, and there's another equation that gives you % water stable aggregate. In the Slakes, you get a soil sample and you just pull off like pea-sized aggregates off of your soil sample. You put these pea-sized aggregates in a petri dish, and you have the application on a phone over that petri dish with a white sheet under it. You do need to get a little LED light that brightens up that so there aren't any shadows. And essentially you video. So, and then you put the petri dish in water, or fill up water, and then you put the aggregates in the petri dish, and the phone just outlines the initial area of the aggregate, and then 10 minutes later outlines the initial area, the aggregate again after it's dispersed, and we just look at that initial area divided by the 10-minute dispersion area, and that gives us an estimate of stability. So it's quantitative too. And then the other soil stability index, gives us some really cool information, but is intense. You take your soils, and you sieve them, dry shaking. There we go. And then you take some of those different sized aggregates and you oscillate them in water and see what comes out. And then you wash them again, and all these different sieves. But this one gives you actually a mean white diameter. So it kind of tells you what the distribution of stable aggregates are. Anyway, you can do all 4 of these procedures, which we did, to compare them. And what we found is they reacted fairly similarly to land use. So we have in blue, we have row crops. In yellow, we have integrated row crop plus perennial systems, so a little less disturbed. And then in the green, we have grass perennial systems. And what you can see that the A, B, and ABCs to tell you if something's significantly different. So Cornell rainfall simulator could tell the difference in aggregate stability of all those systems. All of the others had a difficult time differentiating integrated row crop and perennial systems with grass perennial systems, but they all could differentiate row crop systems. So, we have some variable response. You can see the Slakes app looks a lot like Cornell, except for in this integrated row and perennial system, there's just a lot more variability. And then when we looked at aggregate stability as a function of these managements, if we looked at reduced tillage, we could tell that all of these aggregate stability measurements said, yeah, aggregate stability increases by about 10% or more. If we implemented cover crops, we have the Cornell and the Slakes measurements saying, yep, aggregate stability is stronger. The other two measurement systems couldn't differentiate. If we retain crop residue, almost all of them could differentiate except for the sweat sieve procedure. And then if we applied organic amendments, interesting thing now is Cornell and Slakes cannot see an increase in aggregate stability, and the other two can see a slight increase in aggregate stability. So what does this mean? You know, at the Soil Health Institute, you know, again, I'm a big into proximal sensing or sensing outside and not in the lab. I really like this aggregate stability because of the accessibility and the cost. You know, the cost is your time. And I just had this little movie that shows the aggregate dispersing in the Petri dish. Good times, it's fun. And so the question, you know, is that with a few indicators like soil organic carbon and respiration and aggregate stability, we can get a pretty good handle at some of these functions that we're interested in. I left out water flow because we didn't get a very good relationship with water flow. KSAT is just really hard to measure. And then, so the question is like, how do we put this all together? And I come back to what Kristen was saying before, is that we have to understand our location. And so here, this is a soil in Oregon, and the left-hand side is that soil on the same day as the right-hand side, except on the left-hand side is just a wheat fallow moldboard rotation or cropping system. On the right-hand side across the field is just a pasture site. And then in the middle here, we also measured a soil health management system, which was a wheat pea rotation in no-till. And when we look at these measurements, soil organic carbon, CO2 respiration, aggregate stability, we can see that these three measurements are really helping us track that soil health management system as it comes closer to this target. And I think this is the, you know, kind of what I want to leave you with a mental image of, is that we recognize that different soils will have different targets, but we can use our soil science knowledge and our maps of soils to recognize, you know, what soils in Wisconsin and Minnesota are alike enough that they have similar targets, and then we can start to understand and track our soil health management systems over time. So in summary, I just wanted to reiterate that at the Soil Health Institute this spring, our goal is to have a recommendation of a minimum suite of soil health measurements that are useful for scaling soil, you know, at the millions of acre scale. And first, we want to present this in the peer-reviewed scientific literature and make sure that our science peers approve with our methodologies and our interpretation of the results. But the goal here is we want to quantify functions to assess the impacts of management. We want to describe relationships between management and the environment. We want to relate soil health assessment to economic goals. We're doing some economic analysis as well. And we want to demonstrate progress relative to degraded or target soils. Again, I want to iterate that this is not a replacement for in-depth research on soil functions and soil health practices that are done by soil scientists. And it's also not meant to replace locally relevant nutrient recommendations. This is really just about tracking soil health. But the real summary here is just keep your measurements simple and meaningful. And I think that anyone trying to learn about their soil's response to management can think about it that way and feel empowered to watch their soils change. With that, I do want to thank, these are all those partnering scientists that have managed those long-term research sites and volunteered those sites across North America. That included Canada and Mexico. And with that, I just want to thank you all for your time and attention.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Morgan. That was very helpful, very informational. I've got one question that has come in the chat box. A couple of times you referred to organic amendments. And for our listeners, could you give an example or two of specifically what those organic amendments might be?
Manure.
Okay, that's what I was kind of assuming, but I also recognizing that you had done this over such a big range of places that in different places there might be some other sources, but you're saying it's manure.
Yes, I think in some places it had been composted, and other places it had been more the traditional, you know, throw it out kind of thing. There were some dairy sites, I think, that had dairy manure as well.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. I would encourage folks to go ahead and put a question in there. We've got a few minutes left. In the meantime, perhaps I could ask Erica to put up the CCA QR code so that anyone who is planning to get CEU credits can go ahead and do that. Also, after that, a bit later, be prepared. We're going to put up a very brief poll, just a few questions that we'd like you to answer before you leave, if you'd be so kind. And get back to my chat box here. Still not seeing any questions. I know that this has been a conversation that in recent years has really gained a lot of traction. Here in Minnesota, we host a couple of nutrient management conferences along with the University of Minnesota each year. And I can tell you that in recent years, one of the most popular tracks is always the presentations related to soil health. And so we know this is something that farmers are very interested in, and I think this information today will be very helpful for them. Question that has come in, is there a cost for using the SLAKES app?
No, I think right now the SLAKES app was originally available on an iPhone and on an Android. I think right now just the Android app works well, so it's just free. If you type in SLAKES in your app finder, you'll get it. We do expect, we've been working with the University of Sydney to get another version out that's a little more robust for the iPhone. And so I think be looking for that probably in the next 2 months. I know that we're working on it. We have a company rewriting it. But yeah, it's free. That's the idea.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And you're seeing the poll now, and hopefully you're able to move through that and submit your answers. If there are no other questions, we'll start to do our wrap up here and wind up our noon hour. I want to first give a big thanks to both Kristen and Cristine for being with us today, providing some very helpful information. Also want to remind everyone that this has been recorded. And so if you are wanting to review or look back at any of the information, the easiest place to find that is on the Facebook pages of either the UW Discovery Farms program or Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center. You can find it on either one of our Facebook pages. Also a reminder, if you have not done so yet, and if you did not use the CCA app for CEUs, please put your name and your CCA number in the chat box. If you have difficulty or can't get it there, send one of the organizers an email, and we'll make sure we get you on that credit list as well. Reminder that this is now the last in our weekly series. We'll now take a break over the holidays, and we'll be back on January 6th when we're going to be discussing groundwater protection rule. We have a new nitrogen regulation or limiting rule here in Minnesota that took effect this fall. And we're going to explore that rule and learn how it's affecting farming and nitrogen management. And also there's a proposal or discussion about creating a similar rule in Wisconsin. And so we're going to be discussing that on January 6th. Not seeing any more questions in the chat box. So again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. We had a great attendance again today. Appreciate you all sticking with us. Feel free to check out the recordings later if you need more information. And we invite you to join us again in January. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren.
Erica, go ahead.